Hello my little lunars, you can call me Lovegood and I hope you enjoy this video. Here are just a few things before we get started. Today I'm presenting you with Chapter 6 of How to Raise a Child Nemesis, titled 10 Years Old by sabertoothhousecat on AO3. But anyways, thank you for tuning in to listen to me. As always, tags are in the description as well as warnings, but that's enough of my rambles and jabbles and let's get right into the fic. This is the summary. Summary. Izuku decides it's time he starts doing independent and responsible things, like making pancakes and beating up villains. AFO keeps everything in order. Kind of. Let's get right into the fic. Over the last few months, Izuku had learned many things. He had learned that not Oji-san had a cool quirk that let him give and take quirks as he wanted, which had led to several fantasies of not Oji-san giving Izuku a quirk, which he'd had to shut down with the logic of things like morals and danger. Izuku had endless questions about this quirk, but had to keep them to himself or he'd reveal that he knew not Oji-san was the villain to end all villains. He had learned that All Might had a weird quirk too, with a lot of complicated rules. This he still had to do some research on. He would need to get his hand on more diaries, probably, and that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. But the baseline knowledge he now had was good. But potentially, more than all that, he had learned about Kurogiri. He had learned that Kurogiri, above all possible stretches of the imagination, was a terrible, terrible cook. The worst cook in the world. Izuku had had bad cooking before. Mitsuki's was particularly awful, but Kurogiri's cooking held the record. This had led to Izuku volunteering to shop for himself and make his own lunches weeks ago, which seemed to be a relief to Kurogiri, and it had also led to not Oji-san stepping in on the cooking duties more than once when what Kurogiri attempted making turned out blackened and or raw. There was rarely an in-between. Not Oji-san didn't seem to like cooking, but he was much better at it than Kurogiri. This cooking thing was honestly upsetting. At first, Izuku thought maybe the reason for the bad cooking was that Kurogiri, being made of mist, didn't have to eat. But no, Kurogiri has to eat too. And he also thought his cooking was the worst thing ever. Even after months of cooking for Izuku, it had not improved. Izuku thought he himself could probably do a better job. Which was how Izuku had come to the grand idea of waking up at 6 a.m. and attempting to make pancakes all by himself. He succeeded at mixing the ingredients, although he had some trouble with the eggs, and the batter looked like it was the right consistency when he was done. The frying pan seemed dangerous, and he observed it for a long time, trying to figure out how high to turn the heat and how much butter to put on the pan. He had made pancakes with his mom before. Since his dad was in America, his mom was always trying to get them to do American-style things. Maybe to feel close to him, maybe to understand what he was up to. But when they'd made pancakes, his mom had insisted that she be the one to do the parts that included fire and hot pans, and Izuku, being a very obedient and understanding child, had let her. But now his mom wasn't here and he was alone in the kitchen at 6:45. Mixing the batter had taken him a very long time, mostly because the ingredients were high up and he had to improvise to get them down from the top shelves in the cupboard. Vigilante training, if you asked him. The pan looked somewhat menacing. Izuku could try to turn on the stove by himself, but it seemed like a bad idea, particularly given that he wasn't used to this stove and didn't know anything about how it worked. His mom would not approve. His options from there were limited. He could go to Kurogiri and get him to demonstrate how to turn on the stove, but given Kurogiri's track record, it was likely Kurogiri himself didn't know how to turn it on. And Kurogiri wouldn't understand that Izuku wanted to do the cooking and he would take over the pancake making, and then the pancakes would be terrible. And so really, going to Kurogiri would do the opposite of what Izuku wanted to achieve. The other option was not Oji-san. After some contemplation, Izuku found that there really weren't any drawbacks to asking not Oji-san, so he set down the recipe book and went to find him. It had only taken Izuku a couple weeks to learn that not Oji-san didn't really sleep. Sometimes he took a power nap or two, which he called recharge breaks, to Izuku's delight, but he didn't sleep very often otherwise. Izuku chalked it up to a quirk, probably. All this meant was that Izuku was able to quickly find not Oji-san in his office, swiping through a map and squinting at the computer screen like an old man.
Oji-san,
Izuku said, drawing out the name.
Can you help me? I'm trying to make pancakes and the stove is complicated and also unsafe for me to use all by myself.
Not Oji-san turned slightly in his swivel chair, glaring quite openly at Izuku. What did I say about interrupting my work?
Not to unless it's an emergency.
And?
But it is an emergency.
Not Oji-san looked at the ceiling as if it could help him, which was funny because obviously the ceiling couldn't turn on the stove for Izuku. Evidently, Not Oji-san received no assistance from the ceiling, because with a resigned huff he got up from his chair and entered the bar to help. He stopped short at the sight of the place, and Izuku happily squeezed past him to show him the stove dilemma. What did you do? Not Oji-san asked, awestruck. Izuku observed the kitchen, which he supposed he'd made a bit of a mess of. He'd seen Kurogiri do worse in his defense. It was nothing that a little scrubbing couldn't fix.
The eggs were complicated,
he explained. And the flour? Not Oji-san said, pointing at an offending spot.
I'm not tall enough to get it down normally. Can you turn on the stove?
Not Oji-san picked his way through the landmine of the kitchen. He turned on the stove with expertise. Izuku put the frying pan on top of the stove and then produced the butter.
How much butter do I put on the pan?
He asked. Not Oji-san gave the disaster of the kitchen another look and took the butter right out of Izuku's hands. We can do this part together, he said, cutting a small piece of butter and dropping it into the pan. That sounded just fine to Izuku. He marched over to the batter he'd made and brought it over to the stove. Not Oji-san inspected it and apparently found it up to par because he used one of his quirks to pull the ground up under Izuku as a sort of step stool and gave Izuku a spoon. Not too much, he warned as Izuku stuck the spoon deep into the batter. Izuku carefully put some of the batter on the pan. It was not enough, so he added a little more, and then made another spot with it. And another. Not Oji-san helped him flip them when they were ready, his hands steady on the spatula. When Kurogiri appeared in the bar, looking well rested and calm, Izuku and Not Oji-san had a stack of perfect pancakes and a bigger stack of misshapen pancakes. He froze immediately, his yellow eyes very wide, staring at Izuku on his makeshift step stool and Not Oji-san next to him, both of them eating pancakes by hand as they made more, and Izuku with eggs in his hair and flour on his shirt. You have no right to judge, Not Oji-san said. Kurogiri turned away, resigned. I'll get a mop. For Izuku's 10th birthday, Not Oji-san gave him a really nice computer with a monitor and everything, and a textbook on hero analysis and statistics. He did this with a sour expression, as though he was giving the gifts against his will. Nevertheless, Izuku nearly cried with joy, particularly when he opened the textbook. Kurogiri gave him a brand new hoodie, yellow, and Izuku put it on at once. It was slightly oversized and the bottom of it extended to his knees. He loved it more than anything in the entire world. His mom mailed him a few All Might related things, which Not Oji-san threatened to burn upon their opening. Izuku stuck his tongue out at him, which made him make this funny, enraged, constipated face, and then set about repacking the figures so he could mail them back to himself for a later date. They were all wonderful items. His father sent him a very boring watch, which Izuku contemplated briefly before setting aside. Izuku didn't know his dad all that well, and his dad usually didn't get him anything good, so he felt neutral about the gift, not excited or sad. Not Oji-san seemed more irritated by the gift than Izuku himself, but Not Oji-san was usually irritated anyway. Mitsuki and Masaru, and Kachan likely with resistance, had signed Izuku up for a subscription to Hero magazine, which delighted Izuku for several reasons, including the wonderful content in Hero magazine, the torture that regular deliveries of Hero magazine would bring to Not Oji-san, and the addition to his collection of other similar magazines. Life was good. Those were all the presents Izuku got for his birthday. They were plenty. Not Oji-san, to his relief, didn't seem inclined to set up a birthday party, which was wonderful because Izuku's mom was always trying to set up birthday parties for him, and he always cried when no one showed up. So not having to go through the motions of having a birthday party only for the disappointment of being alone on his birthday anyway was a welcome change. And it was all thanks to the apathy of Not Oji-san, which Izuku found himself loving more and more by the daily. So much freedom came from apathy. Izuku's birthday gift to himself was that he was determined to make the most of his evening. He had a goal: stop one villain fight all on his own without having to call a hero in for help. As Izuku was now in the double digits, he had decided he had come of age to do some actual crime fighting. Fortunately for him, Kurogiri liked Izuku possibly too much.
Kurogiri,
Izuku said, draping himself over the counter at the bar. Very few people actually came into the bar before 8. It made Izuku wonder why they had a bar in the first place.
Today I turned 10 years of age.
Kurogiri's foggy yellow eyes narrowed, as if he knew he was about to get talked into something he didn't actually want to agree to.
I would like to go to Kachan's for my birthday.
He invited you over? Kurogiri asked, wiping off the counter. That was the other thing about this bar. It never got dirty, but Kurogiri was cleaning it all the time anyway.
Yep,
Izuku lied.
Can you drop me off?
Kurogiri glanced toward not Oji-san's study.
He won't mind,
Izuku said, which was probably true. Not Oji-san, he had found, took only a superficial interest in Izuku's upbringing, except the few times he had suddenly become very interested. Izuku preferred not Oji-san when he didn't care what Izuku was up to, because in that window of opportunity was when Izuku did his best work. Kurogiri sighed and put down the rag he was using. All right, he said. Can the Bakugos get you to school in the morning?
Absolutely,
Izuku lied. He'd started getting very good at finding places to sleep in the city. It was either sleep out there, one of his favourites was on the playground because there were plenty of sheltered places there, or tell Kurogiri what he was up to, and he would rather take his chances in the city. He'd almost managed to convince himself it was just like camping in order to come to terms with it. Kurogiri sighed. Go get your bag ready. Izuku ran upstairs like a demon, so excited he could hardly breathe. He would stop crime just like All Might and save lives. 10 years old, and the youngest hero in the history of ever. Wow, he was so awesome. He shoved his green hoodie, his goggles, his hat and scarf and gloves, and abundance of very healthy snacks including 2 granola bars and a pack of chips, his toothbrush, a notebook and a pencil, and his cell phone into a drawstring bag. Successful, he thundered back down the stairs and skidded to a stop in front of Kurogiri, who had a vaguely amused expression on his face.
I'm ready,
Izuku said, trying to regain some dignity by speaking very normally and seriously. Kurogiri made a noise somewhere between a cough and a snort. He opened a portal for Izuku, an occasion which never ceased to be wondrous, and Izuku stepped through. Fighting crime in Musatafu was always the hard part. Not that there wasn't crime in Musatafu, but more like it liked to hide. Izuku started by combing through the sketchier parts of the city, and when that didn't reap any benefits, he climbed up a fire escape and sat on a roof, waiting for some action to begin. Several hours later, he was freezing and beginning to wonder if this was turning out to be the worst birthday of all time. He was just contemplating if it was worth calling Kurogiri and saying he changed his mind and wanted to come home when he heard a scream. He jumped to his feet immediately, forgotten excitement surging up in him again. The best birthday ever was back in swing. He clambered down the fire escape and wove through the alleys towards the noise, making a mental note to start mapping out the city better so he could navigate it more quickly. Still, he found the source of the scream in record time, mostly on account of the scream repeating itself, and found a giant bat lady cornering some other lady. It struck Izuku in that moment that he had no idea how to fight people. He puffed up his cheeks, trying to figure out how to solve the problem without actually doing any fighting, given that he knew about how well that would go for him. He wasn't a super fast runner, so making himself into a distraction wouldn't help and would actually probably just make the situation worse. He didn't actually have enough items with him to make a trap or a different type of distraction, except his phone, which he suspected wasn't actually helpful. The bat lady tried to approach the lady again, who luckily was holding a taser between them and seemed like she was both willing to use it and capable, although clearly terrified. Neither of them had noticed Izuku yet. Maybe Izuku hadn't thought this through properly. Even if he could take down the bat lady, then what? He didn't have anything he could use to tie her up. What a terrible disappointment, and on his birthday no less. Sighing, he stepped forward.
Excuse me, he said miserably. Can I borrow one of your phones?
Both of them looked at him at once. The bat lady looked him up and down, wings lifting more and more by the minute. She glanced at the other lady, hissed, "We'll finish this later," and took off. Izuku couldn't believe it. That was all it took to be a hero. What a thrill! He scared off that bat lady with one look and one simple question. He really was just like All Might. "Thank you," the other lady said shakily, pulling out her phone. "Here."
"Oh, no, that's fine,"
Izuku said, watching the bat lady fly over the roof of the building.
"I don't need—"
The bat lady shrieked from above and, with a crash, fell back into the alley. Wrapped all around her was Eraserhead's capture scarf thing. He followed right after, dropping down and finishing tying her up, looking bored. He looked the lady with the taser up and down, probably scanning for injuries like any awesome hero, and then looked at Izuku, who waved. "You again," Eraserhead said, sounding displeased about this.
"You're welcome,"
Izuku said happily, and then he turned and sprinted away at top speed. Eraserhead was always trying to capture him. As he ran, he began compiling a new list. From here forth, for his vigilante activities, he would need support items. If he was going to actually engage in fights, he needed more things, including more skills and forethought. This had been an excellent birthday party experiment. Never mind that he could have died, but he would refrain from repeating it until he had done much research and at least a little bit of practicing. But wow, a complete success! He and Eraserhead would make very good teammates, Izuku thought. Maybe Eraserhead could be his new favourite hero now that he'd been banned from liking All Might. That seemed like a great idea. He went back to his rooftop perch, pulled out his notebook and a pencil, and began to plot. Ulf-1 hated the word pickle. It was a frivolous word, a cheap word, but right now he had to admit he was in one, and he was in deep. So he had kidnapped Midori Izuku under the guise of being his uncle. Flawless, he'd thought. No one had to die, no suspicions were cast anywhere, and he could keep a close eye on the child as he grew up. But this had been operating under a number of assumptions. First, that Ulf-1 would keep a healthy emotional distance between himself and Midori Izuku. Second, that Ulf-1 would murder Midoriya's mother when the time came for her to return to take care of her son. Third, that Ulf-1 was capable of manipulating Midoriya to like him despite his murder of said mother. Well, Midoriya's grandmother had finally passed on, and Midoriya Inko had called him to tell him that she was preparing to return home, and he was in a pickle. Here's what had gone wrong. Ulf-1 had a reluctant fondness for Midoriya. He was sticking with that description, and thus he couldn't murder Midoriya Inko. This threw off the entire operation. He teleported to a small neighborhood in northwest Japan and scowled at a white house with a pretty front door and a carefully done garden out front. It was fine, he supposed, but not somewhere Midoriya could live. There wasn't enough action here. He'd die from boredom. Ulf-1, like the creep he was, walked around the side of the house and peered in the window. When he found the room he needed, he strolled off down the street and waited until dark. He watched the house as night fell, watched a tired Midori Inko bring her sister and her grandfather into the house. He waited until the lights went out and snuck back up to the house. He peered in the window at the grandfather. He used one of his quirks to give him a nice, prolonged sickness. That would keep Midoriya Inko out of his business for another couple of years. And then there was always the sister. If he really needed to, he could help the grandfather recover, then attack the sister, and go back and forth like that until Izuku graduated. Satisfied, he returned to the bar. Alrighty, my little Lunas, that is a wrap of this one. So, Ulf-1 growing fond of Izuku. Izuku's now 10! Yay! More Izuku and Eraserhead interactions and Izuku Vigilante. I love this chapter a lot. I love all the chapters a lot, if you can tell. So, my little learners, this is a little reminder that you might have something you need to check. I hope you will have a fantastic time, wherever and whenever you may be. Day, night, dusk, dawn, low tide, high tide, whatever it is for you. You can call me Lovegood, and that was Chapter 6 of How to Raise a Child Nemesis, titled 10 Years Old by sabertoothhousecat on AO3. Again, the link to this fic will be in the pinned comment by me on this video, and tags are in the description as well as warnings. Bye, little Lunars.